When a black teenager moves to a prestigious but predominantly white high school, she expects to work hard and make friends, but instead she faces relentless discrimination from students who see her as an outsider, and from teachers who belittle and demean her at every turn. What they don't realize is that the silent abuse they inflict on her each day will be exposed, leading to a powerful reckoning that shakes the very foundation of the school. This is a story of resilience, courage, and the fight for dignity in a place that was supposed to offer opportunity. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe in equality and accountability, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Kayla glanced around her new neighborhood as the moving van pulled away, trying to match her parents' smiles and excitement. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a safe, quiet area, good schools, and new opportunities. Her father's job promotion had made it possible, and her parents couldn't hide their pride. This is it, Kayla, a great place for a new beginning, her mother said, patting her shoulder reassuringly. Kayla nodded, offering a small smile, but a knot of anxiety was already forming in her stomach. Moving to a new place was always hard, but this neighborhood felt different, foreign even, and she hadn't seen a single face that looked like hers. The next morning, she gathered her things and tried to shake off her nervousness as she stepped into Greenwood Middle School. The halls bustled with students chatting and laughing, but she felt the weight of eyes on her immediately. She looked around and caught a few lingering stares. A boy whispered something to his friend as they walked by, followed by a quick glance in her direction. Kayla's cheeks grew warm, and she dropped her gaze, trying to blend into the crowd. As she reached her first class, she took a deep breath and walked in, feeling the hush that fell over the room. As she entered, the teacher, a tall woman with piercing eyes and a non-nonsense demeanor, glanced at her with a tight-lipped smile. Class, we have a new student joining us today, she announced. Kayla, would you like to introduce yourself? Kayla's heart thumped as she stepped forward. Hi, I'm Kayla, she managed, her voice steady but soft. A couple of students in the back exchanged glances, smirking. One of them leaned over and muttered, "Guess they're letting anyone in here now." Kayla stiffened, but pretended she hadn't heard. "It's just nerves," she told herself. "Typical new kid stuff." Miss Parker continued with the lesson, but Kayla felt the eyes on her throughout the class, every laugh and whisper feeling sharper than usual. At lunch, she scanned the cafeteria, hoping to find a friendly face. Spotting an empty seat at a table with a group of girls, she walked over, her tray wobbling slightly in her hands. "Is it okay if I sit here?" she asked, her voice tentative. One of the girls, a blonde with a high ponytail, barely looked at her before shrugging. "Yeah, whatever," she muttered, returning to her conversation. Kayla set her tray down and took a seat, trying to join in and feel a part of the group, but as soon as she sat down, she felt a shift in the air. The girls glanced at each other, raising their eyebrows, then slid a few inches away, as if she had brought an unwelcome presence to the table. "Doesn't she know we don't want her here?" one of them whispered, just loud enough for Kayla to catch her words. Filled with disdain, another girl laughed, not even attempting to hide her reaction. "This is going to be interesting," she muttered. Kayla felt a lump form in her throat as her face grew hot with embarrassment. She tried to focus on her food, keeping her head down as the conversation continued around her, but she couldn't help hearing bits and pieces, snide remarks, dismissive laughs, subtle glances thrown her way. Each one was a reminder that she didn't belong here, at least not in their eyes. She forced herself to finish her lunch as quickly as possible, her appetite completely gone. The cafeteria felt unbearably loud and hostile, every laugh and murmur like a weight pressing down on her. Finally, she stood up, taking her tray to the disposal area with as much composure as she could muster. She didn't dare look back at the table, afraid of the judgmental eyes following her exit. As she walked down the hallway after lunch, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been with her since the morning. She wanted so badly to fit in, to make Greenwood Middle School her home, but the comments and cold looks left her feeling like an outsider. As the bell rang, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the rest of the day, but the lingering dread in her stomach hinted that this new beginning might be harder than she'd imagined. Kayla took a deep breath as she walked into Greenwood Middle School on her second day, determined to push aside the unease that had followed her home yesterday. "Today will be better," she told Herself adjusting the strap of her backpack. They just need to get used to me. Once they do, everything will be fine. Her first class of the day was history, and she slipped into a seat near the back, hoping to avoid drawing attention. Miss Parker started the lesson. Moving through the usual topics about early civilizations, Kayla tried to stay focused, determined to contribute and show that she belonged here. As Miss Parker posed a question about the day's reading, Kayla raised her hand, eager to participate, but the teacher merely looked at her, eyebrow arched before sighing. "Are you sure you know the answer, Kayla? I don't want you to embarrass yourself." Kayla's heart sank. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks as a few students chuckled, casting her smirking glances. She lowered her hand slowly, her excitement deflating in an instant. Miss Parker moved on, picking another student who answered with ease and received a nod of approval. Kayla stared down at her notebook, trying to shake off the embarrassment that seemed to be sticking to her like glue. As the lesson continued, she stole a glance around the room. A couple of students exchanged knowing looks, as if Miss Parker's comment had somehow validated what they already thought about her. She shifted uncomfortably, feeling each second stretch out painfully. Later in the day, Kayla found herself in night class. Miss Parker split the students into groups, assigning Kayla to work with 3 classmates she didn't know well. As she approached her assigned table, she noticed that they looked at her with barely concealed irritation. They began discussing ideas for the project, brainstorming ways to tackle the assignment. Kayla tried to join in, sharing her thoughts on how they could start with a hypothesis, but before she could finish, one of the boys cut her off with an exasperated look. "We don't need any ghetto ideas, all right," he said, a mocking edge to his voice. Kayla blinked, stunned. She wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The boy just rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. "You heard me, maybe keep those ideas to yourself," he smirked, looking over at the 2 other students. For confirmation, one of the girls beside him let out a small snicker, then leaned in toward him. "This is what happens when you bring them in here. They're just not on our level." Her voice was cold and dismissive. Kayla's throat tightened, a wave of hurt washing over her. She wanted to stand up for herself, to push back against their cruel words, but before she could respond, the 3rd student, a tall boy with a blank expression, shrugged and muttered, "She really doesn't even belong here." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. They weren't just dismissing her ideas, they were dismissing her, as if she was less than them, as if she didn't deserve to be here at all. She gripped the edge of her desk, trying to keep her composure. The laughter from the other 2 stung, echoing in her ears long after they quieted down. Swallowing back her frustration, Kayla decided not to respond. She focused on her notebook, letting her eyes blur over the page. She could feel the glances of her group members on her, the unspoken judgment simmering in their stares. For the rest of the period, she kept her head down, contributing only when absolutely necessary, doing everything she could to block out their words, but the weight of their hostility lingered, pressing down on her chest. After class, Kayla headed into the hallway, hoping to escape the oppressive atmosphere. She kept her eyes on the floor, wanting only to get to her next class without another incident. But as she made her way down the corridor, a group of students passed by, one of them muttering loudly enough for her to hear. She heard the Nimward. Kayla stopped in her tracks, her heart hammering in her chest. She felt a surge of anger, a white-hot flash of pain that threatened to spill over. She wanted to turn around to confront him, to scream at him for the cruel, ugly words he'd thrown at her. But her mind raced with 1,000 reasons why she couldn't. What would they do if she reacted? Would they just laugh, twist her anger into something to mock her for? Instead, she clenched her fists, swallowing down her anger and forcing herself to keep walking. She focused on her breathing, trying to steady herself as the other student laughter echoed behind her. Every step felt heavy, weighed down by the reality that her classmates and even her teacher seemed intent on making her feel like she didn't belong. When she finally reached her locker, she took a shaky breath and leaned against it, willing herself not to cry. She was determined not to let them see her weakness, even if she felt broken inside. The thought of facing this every day filled her with dread. The ugly words, the mocking laughs, the judgmental stares. She wondered how long she could hold out, how much she could take before it all became too much. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the next class, she straightened up and forced herself to move forward, but a pit of despair had settled deep in her stomach. She had hoped things would get better, that they would give her a chance. Instead, she felt more alone than ever, surrounded by people who seemed determined to tear her down. Soon the bell rang, and it was recess again. Kayla took a deep breath, clutching her lunch tray a little tighter as she scanned the cafeteria. Yesterday's lunch had been humiliating, but she was determined to try again. She just needed to find the right group, someone open-minded enough to give her a chance. Maybe today would be different. She spotted a table with a few students who seemed engrossed in conversation, but didn't look overly hostile. Mustering her courage, she approached and offered a small smile. "Hi, mind if I join you?" A few heads turned her way, eyebrows raised, and one of the girls gave a quick, dismissive glance before looking back at her friends. "Sure," she said flatly, returning to her conversation. Kayla took a seat, feeling the silence settle awkwardly around her. She unpacked her sandwich, hoping to ease herself into the group's conversation, but the other students didn't make room for her. One of the girls at a nearby table noticed her, a smirk spreading across her face. She nudged her friend loud enough for Kayla to hear. "Look at her acting like she actually belongs here. What a joke," another girl snickered, rolling her eyes. "Yeah, no one told her she's not one of us." Ha, the comments hit Kayla like a punch to the stomach. She gripped her sandwich, her appetite suddenly gone, and kept her head down, trying to ignore the cruel whispers and stifled laughs. The lunchroom felt unbearably loud. Every laugh and voice amplified each sound, a reminder that she was alone here, that she didn't belong. She blinked quickly, trying to fight back, the tears threatening to spill. She'd sworn to herself she wouldn't let them see her cry, wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But it was hard. Just as she was about to stand up and leave, she noticed a table across the cafeteria, where 3 students were watching her with concern, not judgment. One of them, a black girl with kind eyes and a warm smile, caught her gaze and gave her a little wave. She gestured for Kayla to come over, her expression open and friendly. Kayla hesitated, glancing back at the table where she sat, where the others had already resumed their conversation. Acting as though she didn't exist, she picked up her tray, trying not to look too eager, and made her way over to the other table, her heart beating with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Hey there, I'm Alicia," the girl introduced herself as Kayla sat down. "You don't need to worry about them." She gave a quick glance toward the other table, a knowing look in her eyes. "They're just like that." Kayla managed a weak smile, relieved to finally be around someone friendly. "Thanks," she said quietly, feeling a bit of the tension in her shoulders ease. Alicia nodded, understanding. "It's hard enough being new." "I get it," she introduced the others. Raj, a boy with dark, thoughtful eyes who nodded politely, and Leia, a white girl with a relaxed, friendly demeanor. "So how's your first couple of days been?" Leia asked, her tone light but caring. Kayla let out a small sigh, unsure of how much to share. "It's been a lot to get used to," she admitted. "Some people haven't exactly been welcoming." Raj rolled his eyes. "Yeah, that sounds like them," he said dry. "It's like they forget they're not the only people in the world." Kayla chuckled, a real laugh this time, and felt some of the tense iron inside her ease a bit more. The 4 of them fell into an easy conversation, with Alicia sharing stories about the last time someone had tried to mock her for her hair, and Raj laughing as he described his surprise at just how much curry jokes still existed in this day and age. Leah chimed in, expressing her frustration over how small-minded people could be, especially at Greenview. For the first time since arriving at this school, Kayla felt like she wasn't completely alone. Here were people who understood, who didn't judge her for her skin or her background. As they laughed and talked, Kayla could feel her spirits lifting, a small spark of hope igniting inside her. Alicia leaned in closer, her tone sincere. "If you ever need anything, just come find us. You're not alone, okay?" Kayla nodded, feeling a tightness in her chest that wasn't sadness this time, but something closer to relief. "Thank you, really, I needed this." Leah gave her a gentle smile. "No worries, we're here for you." As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Kayla gathered her things, glancing back at her new friends with a grateful smile. Walking to her next class, she felt lighter, the warmth of their kindness still with her. But as she entered the hallway, the familiar tension returned, a reminder that this school wasn't a safe place yet. She noticed some of the same students from the cafeteria whispering as she passed, their eyes cold and calculating. She steeled herself, refusing to let them see her falter, but the sting of their exclusion was still there. The hostility in the air was unmistakable, and Kayla knew that her few friends couldn't completely shield her from it. Yet, despite the looks and the whispered insults, she clung to the glimmer of hope she'd found at lunch. There were people who cared, who saw her for who she was, not just the color of her skin, and for now that was enough to keep her going. Every day Kayla walked into Greenwood Middle School with a sense of dread that seemed to settle deeper into her bones. The initial excitement of starting at a new school had long faded, replaced by a constant anxiety that made her shoulders heavy and her steps hesitant. Miss Parker, her history teacher, seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to find every small mistake Kayla made and magnify it for the whole class to see. If Kayla raised her hand eager to answer, Miss Parker would either ignore her completely or sigh when Kayla didn't respond fast enough, and when Kayla did manage to answer, it was as if Miss Parker had been waiting for her to stumble. One morning Miss Parker was reviewing an assigned reading. Kayla, who had stayed up late the night before studying, felt ready. She wanted to prove to herself, and maybe even to Miss Parker, that she could hold her own. She raised her hand, heart thumping, and waited as Miss Parker called on her. "Go ahead, Kayla," Miss Parker said, crossing her arms and raising an eyebrow. Kayla took a deep breath and started to explain her interpretation of the text, but halfway through she stumbled over a word, her nerves suddenly flaring up. She tried to catch herself, but Miss Parker was already shaking her head. "Kayla," she interrupted, her tone laced with disappointment, "you need to put in more effort if you want to keep up with the others. This isn't acceptable at this level." She sighed heavily, turning to the rest of the class. "It's important for all of us to be prepared. We can't waste time on incomplete answers." Kayla's cheeks burned. She glanced around and saw a few students smirking, whispering to each other. The shame felt like it was swallowing her whole. She wanted to disappear, to just melt into the floor and never have to look anyone in the eye again. From that day on, she hesitated before raising her hand. She wanted to prove herself, to show that she was just as capable as everyone else. But Miss Parker's cold looks and sharp comments kept her frozen. The fear of being humiliated in front of the entire class was overpowering, and every time she stayed silent, her confidence slipped a little more. At lunch, she found refuge with Alicia, Raj, and Leah. They had become her only sanctuary in the school, the one place where she felt seen and understood. Together, they shared their own struggles, the kinds of stories they knew the others wouldn't understand. One afternoon, as they ate together, Kayla let out a frustrated sigh. "Miss Parker really seems to have it out for me," she murmured, picking at her food. "I don't get it. I try so hard, but nothing's ever good enough for her." Alicia nodded sympathetically. "I know the feeling," she said, her voice low. "In elementary school, one of my teachers used to do the same thing. Every little thing I did wrong, she'd call out like she was waiting for me to mess up. It was exhausting." Raj leaned forward, nodding. "I get that too. Some teachers just don't know how to be fair. When I first moved here, they'd always ask me to repeat myself like they couldn't understand my accent. They just pretend it was a joke, but it didn't feel funny to me." Leah looked at each of them, a sad understanding in her eyes. "It's so unfair. People don't even try to understand what it's like for you guys. They're so quick to judge. They think they're better just because they're the majority here." The group fell silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Kayla felt a pang of gratitude toward her friends, the only people who seemed to genuinely care about what she was going through. Yet even with their support, the weight of Miss Parker's constant scrutiny and the whispered judgments from her classmates were beginning to wear her down. She started to withdraw, hiding more and more of her experiences from her parents. They were so proud of her being at Greenview, and she didn't want to tarnish that for them. Every night when they'd ask how her day was, she'd force a smile and say it was fine, just busy. She was careful not to let them see the cracks forming beneath the surface, but the stress followed her home, clinging to her even when she was alone in her room each night. As she lay in bed, the words echoed in her mind, the sighs, the disapproval, the whispers. The pressure felt like it was pressing down on her, stealing her breath. Sleep became elusive, her mind replaying every embarrassing moment, every cruel comment. One night, as she tossed and turned, her mother knocked on her door and peeked inside. "Hey, Kayla, everything okay?" she asked, her tone gentle, filled with concern. Kayla sat up, forcing a smile. "Mom, just a lot of homework." "I'm fine." Her mother gave her a searching look, but Kayla's practiced smile held steady. Finally, her mother nodded, though the worry didn't fully leave her face. "All right, sweetheart, just remember we're here for you. Okay, you don't have to keep everything to yourself." As her mother closed the door, Kayla felt a pang of guilt. She wanted to confide in her, to let it all spill out, but the fear of disappointing her parents kept her silent. They had worked so hard to give her this opportunity, to send her to what they believed was the best school. How could she tell them that every day felt like a battle in the quiet darkness of her room? She let herself feel the weight of everything she'd been holding inside: the exhaust ion, the sadness, the isolation, it all pressed down on her. Relentless and unyielding, she hugged her pillow tightly. Feeling a tear slip down her cheek, "I'll just try harder," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the silence. "I just have to be strong. It'll get better." But deep down, a part of her was beginning to doubt that things would ever change. As each day passed, the small glimmer of hope she'd once held on to grew fainter, and the loneliness grew stronger. As the harassment escalates, Clay starts to skip school at first.